As security engineers, we're usually focused on the securing part of the equation: patches, vulnerabilities, configuration. But we don't always appreciate a crucial part of the process that tells us how we're doing: reporting. BigFix has you covered. Let's talk web reports. My name is Mike Consuegra. I'm the Director of Training and Content Development at AIS. You can connect with me on LinkedIn by scanning the QR code. I've worked with BigFix long enough to know that many users only scratch the surface of web reports. So today, I'm going to talk to you about some of the less well-known features so you can take greater advantage of the capabilities of web reports. If you've spent any time with BigFix, then you're at least passingly familiar with web reports. For those that haven't used it at all or that often, I'd like to start off with a brief intro, then cover three main areas: features, reports and data, and lastly, access control. Web reports is first and foremost a data aggregation and visualization tool. Virtually any data gathered by your endpoints and available through the BigFix console can also be accessed here. Unlike the console, which is more of an administration tool, web reports provide some built-in reports that you can use out of the box to gain insight into your environment. Although authentication is a requirement for those that want to access the full features of web reports, there are also ways to export the data and provide it in a more static manner to those not allowed to log into the server. The BigFix console is a thick client that has to be installed on a Windows computer. Web reports is more flexible. It can be accessed from any place where you have a browser and a network connection to the server, whether that be a laptop, desktop, or mobile device. When first logging onto web reports, you're not starting from scratch. You already have dozens of pre-built reports for each of the enabled BigFix modules, which you can then customize or use as templates to create your own and save. You can even highlight the ones that are most important to you. Clicking on any of the modules in the landing page takes you into the reports specific to that module, which are filtered by labels. Click on a live link within any report and you'll drill further into the details of that report. In many cases, you can continue to drill through to see finer details of the report. By definition, web reports is about reporting, but there's other functionality that we would all expect to see from such a platform. First, you'll need an account. You won't be able to create reports until you're granted access. The good news is that you can use either local or LDAP accounts. Everything in web reports is read-only, sort of like a one-way window, which means that even though users can see everything the console sees, they can't make the leap across that bridge to create actions or affect endpoints in any way. Feel free to run as many reports as you like without worrying about impacting production. Because web reports has its own database separate from the primary BigFix database, it means running reports won't affect the performance of the rest of the platform. You can always take it with you. You can export reports as CSV to bring into Excel. You can also format the output to a more printable format, potentially even sending it to a PDF writer. Now that you've seen the basics, let's talk about some configurable features. Just because your landing page is the domain list doesn't mean it has to stay that way. By using the preferences, any user can change the landing page. This change will only affect the logged on user, which means different users can have different landing pages. Another option users can manage is their password, but only if they're local users. LDAP-based users must change their passwords at the directory server level. We've all generated reports with lots of data, only to see the data being split into 25 separate pages. One of the user preference options gives you the ability to display up to 1,000 items per report page. This means that you'll be able to see more items per page and generate less pages, or if your report contains less items than the maximum number you define per page, you'll be able to see them all in a single page. Something you might have noticed when looking at the console data versus web reports is that properties that were relevant at one point may no longer be, yet they still show their last reported value in the BigFix console. However, when you look at this property in web reports, it might show as not reported. This is due to a server preference setting in web reports which can be changed by adding or modifying a value in the registry of the web report server. The setting is called Show Not Relevant Results. After making the change and restarting the web report server, the property in the report will show the same value as it does in the console. Web reports is a great tool for displaying data and predefined properties being collected from BES clients. But what if you need more? In the BigFix console, you have the presentation debugger. It provides a built-in way to gather information about computers and content. Not everyone has access to the console, though, if it doesn't fall within the scope of their duties. Okay, no problem. You can use the Session Relevance Tester. With the Session Relevance Tester, you only need a Web Reports ID and a network path to the Web Reports server. This is a standalone tool developed by one of the most recognizable names in the world of BigFix content, Leeway. But what if Leeway's contact info isn't in your address book and you still can't get access to either of these two tools? Well, as it turns out, Web Reports has a built-in tool that you can use to ask session relevance questions without installing a standalone tool or getting access to the console. It's accessed right from your browser by going to the URL of your Web Report server and redirecting to page equal Q&A. What you'll get is a window in which you'll be able to enter session relevance queries the same way you would in either the presentation debugger or the session relevance tester. I know that with the presentation debugger and session relevance tester, this may look superfluous, but it'll become clear why I bring it up when I start creating custom reports, especially if you don't have console access. Speaking of the data you can ask Web Reports about, how does that data actually get into the Web Reports database? It actually comes from a data source created during installation of Web Reports. This is the data retrieved through that data source. The previous example showed the data source pointing to a specific BigFix instance with 5 computers. But I've been at organizations that have multiple BigFix instances for different business units across the enterprise. This one, for example, points to an environment with 13 endpoints. But just because you have different BigFix servers throughout the company doesn't mean you have to generate the same report across the different instances. Web Reports has the ability to aggregate data from different BigFix instances into a single Web Reports server. All you need to do is add a new data source and enter the URL of the other BigFix server you want to aggregate from. You will need a master operator ID on every separate BigFix instance you want to aggregate data from. There are some caveats to keep in mind when aggregating data. The server where you're creating the new data source, let's call it server A, must be able to see the server where the data is coming from, server B. Secondly, the schema versions of both databases must be the same. You can verify that by running a SQL query on the BF Enterprise database. Select version from dbo.info. Make sure you have the same version for both. Lastly, restart the Web Reports service on server A. This is usually done by default when you add the data source. When logging in, you'll see both data sources synchronizing the data. Once the process is complete, you will be able to see both the data sources in server A. And you'll also be able to see the data from both BigFix instances in a single Web Reports server. Okay, let's talk about the primary use of Web Reports, reports and data. The included standard reports in the platform are created by filtering the data coming through the data source. The data is propagated to the BES reporting database and displayed in the datasets in the web interface. Those datasets are computers, content, actions, operators, and unmanaged assets. Eagle-eyed viewers will note that I've left something out of this list, but not to worry, we'll be coming back to it shortly. Computers reports on all the different properties resulting from managed client queries. Content displays information about fixlets, tasks, baselines, and data like what their deployment progress is across the endpoint population. Action shows pertinent information about actions taken, including their ID, status, issuer, and so on. Operators reports on the characteristics of platform operators and their level of access. And unmanaged assets displays any information retrieved by the asset discovery scans. Once you've selected a dataset as the focus of your report, you'll need to filter the information to make it usable. Filters allow you to fine-tune the report. So first, select your dataset. Then select the property on which you'll base the filter condition. Next, select an operator, the conditions keyword, and lastly, click Apply Filter. Filters take you from the drinking from a fire hose scenario to a more manageable report focusing on just the information you need to see. Like other condition-based content in the BES console, filters can have multiple clauses. These can be AND clauses where all conditions must be met for the results to be displayed, and they're added using the plus button at the end of each clause. But you can also add OR clauses that test individual conditions and display data if at least one is true. OR clauses are added by using the Add Clause link inside each condition. You can also use a combination of AND plus OR clauses to fine-tune your filter. When creating reports on the fly, you simply create your filter criteria and click Apply Filter. But what if you need to reuse that filter for other reports? You can save the filter, preserving the conditions you used to generate that report. At a later time, when you need to recreate the conditions in a different report, just click Load Filter and select from the ones you've saved before. You may be thinking that filters with few conditions may not be candidates for saving. There may be cases, however, which have conditions that lend themselves to more easily being recreated by automating the process. Okay, so you've started with a standard report and you've created a filter to fine-tune the data. What if you need more detail in your report? By selecting Edit Columns, you can change the columns of data being displayed. Click on the Edit Columns button to select from available properties for the data set in your report. This allows you to add new columns as well as remove existing ones. Your selections will be registered in the Edit Columns view. Once done, your report will show the new columns and remove the deleted ones. Reports can also contain basic charts and graphs. Once your report is displaying data, you can click the Add Chart link at the top right of the Charts section. And after entering some chart configuration information, you'll see the chart for the report data. The most crucial step in creating your report, though, is saving it. I can't stress this enough. Wait, yes I can. Save your report, especially if you've created it using a complex filter that you haven't actually saved. Once saved, you can decide if the report will be for your own use or visible to all operators. The ease of use of web reports means that every report I've shown you up to now is based on selecting properties from drop-down menus. This means that the web report writes the HTML code that displays the report on the screen. If you're not satisfied with the data or report format you get through the drop-down menus, you can just write your own. Two things about writing your own custom reports. 1. You have to know how to write HTML, XML, JavaScript, CSS, etc. To be able to display the report. 2. You have to know the session relevance used to retrieve the data from BigFix. And that's the piece I didn't discuss earlier when going through the datasets, the custom report link. This is where you can enter the HTML code to create a truly custom report. You could also preview the report after you finish entering the code. The preview will show you what it will look like based on the code you entered, but the same warning I gave before applies to this report. It is not saved. My suggestion is to write this report in an offline HTML editor where you can save it as you go, and you won't lose it if your browser crashes. If you do choose to write it here, save often. Now let's say you don't like the built-in reports, but you can't write HTML. There are some in the BigFix community who write reports and share them publicly. You can download those reports and import them into your own web report server. These 3 reports were written by the same person that created the session relevance tester, Leeway. Once you have the report files, you can import them by clicking on the Import Report link in your Web Reports page. Once you select the file, you'll see it listed next to the button. Then click Import. The report will show in the report list, and you can see the report format and data by clicking on it. I know what you might be thinking. I don't remember seeing that Import Report link before in my Web Reports main page. And you'd be right, because imports are not enabled by default. In order to get that option, you must enable it by modifying the registry of the Web Reports server. You need to set the field in the Allow Custom Report Creation value to 1. After modifying this value, you must restart the Web Report server, at which point you will see the Import Report option. Now that you've seen some of Web Reports' features, let's go on to our last topic, access control. Once up and running, the Web Report server can be integrated with a directory server in one of 2 ways, which are mutually exclusive if the server is installed on Windows. The first method allows for integration with Active Directory or the IBM Security Directory server. This method allows for LDAP integration when the Web Report server is installed on either Windows or Linux. The current method, as of BigFix version 9.5, only allows for Active Directory integration if installed on Windows. As of BigFix version 9.2.6, SAML integration is also possible. You will still point your browser to the Web Report server, but the logon will be redirected to the identity provider defined for SAML. Okay, so you've done the LDAP integration or not, and now you have to create users. You can do that from Administration, User Management. For local users, you select Create User and provide a username, password, and a role. When adding LDAP users, you're not so much adding users as you are mapping them from Active Directory to Web Reports roles. Click on LDAP Permissions, click on the domain to search for the user, enter the username, and assign them a role. At that point, the user will be able to sign on to Web Reports with this Windows ID and password. You can also search for Web Reports roles that you have assigned to users or LDAP groups. In this case, I search for Read Only, and I can see that I've already assigned that role to BF Patch Admins. I can then assign it to other users or LDAP groups that don't show it as being assigned. Web Reports comes with 3 built-in roles. Administrator gives full access to the entirety of Web Reports functions. The normal role allows a user to create private and public reports and filters, but not manage other users or change any configuration within the platform. Read-only users are able to create reports and filters, but not share them with other users or edit public reports or filters. Those 3 might seem a little sparse, so if the predefined roles don't meet your needs, you can always create custom roles. One reason you might want to create your own roles is the limited access control of the built-in roles. Custom roles can address this by limiting member users' visibility in a couple of different ways. The first way is by using filters. Typically, any user added to Web Reports, normal or read-only, will be able to see all content and computers regardless of what their operator account can see in the BigFix console. Filters can be created so that users only see computers based on the conditions of the filter. So, in this case, the members of this role will only be able to see Windows desktops and laptops. The second way to restrict visibility is via the rights of specific console operators. So in essence, this is done by creating a specific role, so let's just say Windows Server Admin, and mapping a user or users to the same access the source user has in the console. Obviously, this can present its own problems since each user would require their own Web Reports role. Since Web Reports allows linking to a user but not a role, there's another way to manage visibility. Create an operator in the console which will act as a pseudo role for Web Reports. Make that operator a member of the console role that limits its access. Base the Web Reports role off that console operator. Any web reports user that is a member of that role will only see computers visible to that console operator on which this user's access is based. This method not only restricts computer data, but can also restrict content. On the left, you can see that the web reports administrator can see all content sites. On the right, you can see a non-admin user in the limited number of content sites I've restricted him to. If you've used web reports in any capacity, I've probably shown you a few things you may know, but hopefully some you didn't. Before I end though, I'd like to leave you with some parting thoughts on why I think web reports is an underrated and underutilized part of the BigFix platform. 1. Flexibility. Web reports gives novice users the ability to create reports in minutes without any expertise in HTML or session relevance. At the same time, it allows power users to create complex reports with vibrant charts and graphs. 2. Access controls. Even though it may require a little front-end work, master operators can grant access to as much or as little data as a user needs without risking unauthorized actions or on endpoints. And data sharing. This feature gives organizations the ability to aggregate data from a single instance or multiple BigFix instances into one, and then share that data via email or printed documents. All in all, when used in its full potential, web reports can significantly augment the abilities many of us already have when using the rest of the BigFix toolset. I hope you enjoyed this video, and remember, there's still a lot to discover, so keep BigFixing.